of Russia and the Muslims. But now that China is playing both sides of the fence and has joined the WTO or is in the process of doing this, they can go ahead and take care of business. George W. Bush Jr. says he'll do it for him, but maybe Clinton will beat him to the punch. Finish the job that Bush Sr. didn't do and kill that Saddam and take that oil so they can have an American WTO trilateralist world banker oil pipeline from Baghdad to Beijing, because there's an industrial revolution happening in China, and whoever controls that economically and controls the oil flow in there wins. So these events that are taking place in Iraq are directly tied in with this protest and martial law situation at the WTO. It all fits into the big picture like a grand chessboard for world domination of the East versus the West. And only the Baha'is, under the provisions of the covenant, are the only people in the world that has a message for the rest of humanity. And that message doesn't come from them. It doesn't even come from the second coming of Christ, Baha'u'llah. It comes from God, that the descendant of David must be the president of this universal house of justice so we can recognize it from fakes, frauds, and imitations and have peace on earth with justice. And this makes those that support this true line of David as the executives the only group in the world that's not anti-Christ. And that's the key to this whole thing. God is known through his qualities and attributes: love, mercy, justice, generosity, concord, fidelity, and harmony. Like Christ says, you'll know a tree by its fruits. Well, look at the fruits of the WTO. Repression, tyranny, violence. Okay? And a fruitless tree, well, is fit for the fire. And this is why the world's stored up for this type of thermonuclear war that's prophesied to take place. And as soon as China is done joining the WTO, they can go in and assassinate Saddam Hussein so Americans can sell the Iraqi oil to the Chinese. Whereas before China joined the WTO, if they go in and kill Saddam and grab Iraq, then they're into a war with China and Russia and the Muslims. And this WTO meeting is essential to get China on the Western financial side. So China, as we approach the year of the dragon of the year 2000 in their prophecies, is prepared for this. The Chinese believe that the prophecy of Nostradamus for the 7th month of 1999 pertains to them, because it says the king of terror will be seen from the sky, and it says that this will happen of Anglo-Ma, which they know is China or Mongolia. And so it was in September that they paraded through Tiananmen Square their ballistic missile program, and now they have a space program, showing that they are a power to be dealt with through the air with nuclear weapons and space technology. Well, 7 months before that, which was 7 months into 99 from the birthday of Dr. Jensen in August, brought us to May 23rd, or March 23rd. And on this program in February, we indicated that date as the first 7 months of Nostradamus' prophecy. And sure enough, on that day, NATO, the king of terror from the sky, went in and wiped out Kosovo and Serbia, and they bombed the Chinese embassy, deliberately forcing a military alliance with Russia and China. And this is how the king of terror from the sky has helped resurrect the military and space power of the old empire of Genghis Khan, which enveloped Russia, China, and all the Muslim countries. And this has us poised for a war between the East and the West. And these people in Seattle are for free trade, but they're not for free trade at the expense of human rights. And this is the problem that confronts us today. And we have the solution, the golden elixir of the golden rod. And that is a rod of iron, is a house of justice elected from all the people of the world, the way iron is extracted from ore. Not an appointed WTO, but an elected from all universal suffrage for the people that believe in the truth of what it should be like. And the rod of wood being the descendant of King David, that's the executive. And when this fallible rod of wood comes in contact with that fallible rod of iron, it creates a combination of an infallible rod of gold, like carbon and filings, that produces electricity, which is a power that's not produced when the components are separated. This produces that divine elixir, or electric, that will bring peace to our world, if we choose to have it so. And Christ told us the solution when he said, "Whosoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in Baha'u'llah," giving us the name of the second coming of Christ. Well, Baha'u'llah and the Bab, his forerunner, has a prophecy for this. It's called the Mustagath, which means the great day of resurrection, when God is invoked for help by all the people of the world. The day that God is invoked is what Mustagath means. And in the ancient language, they used to write, they didn't have Arabic numerals like we have, so their letters was numbers. A was 1, B was 2. Well, in that language, Mustagath adds up to the 2001. And this is stated by Baha'u'llah and the Bab in the Baha'i Holy Writings. And as we approach the year 2001, from January 1st, 2000 to January 1st, 2001, we have this great day where there will be a victory of the forces of light over these forces of darkness. And this world will become like a divine paradise, and we will have free trade, but not at the expense of human rights. But we will have free trade upholding human rights, universal human rights, and we will have unity. But we will have that unity through diversity. And God will look down, and the people will see that all the world has been transformed with the spread of love and mercy and justice and generosity and concord and fidelity and harmony. And all these religions of hate, these ideas of prejudice and the backbiting and the scheming and the plans of man will come to an end. For it's stated in the Holy Writ that man schemes and God schemes, and God's the better schemer. And now I'd like to introduce a producer, one of the producers of the show, Harold Shinsato, that's going to be giving us a review on a slide presentation that was shown recently in town on Iraq. He's going to be talking about Y2K and several other things that are real important that's all coming to a head. And these are not acausal, synchronicitous events, but they have a definite purpose of why all these things are happening at the same time. This riot in Seattle is no coincidence. It happened at the time that this protest also took place in Chicago with the covenant breakers in that area that violated this. These things are connected through a mysterious spiritual connection. Nostradamus connected Seattle on the 48th parallel with this knowledge of the hands in his writings that we've spoken of on the program in a prophecy several weeks ago. Without any more waiting, I'd like to welcome on Harold Shinsato with this presentation on Iraq and Y2K, and it'll also be following a video. Thanks for being here, Harold.
Thank you very much, Neil. I'm not going to be saying too much here. This is mostly an introduction, but there were a few things I wanted to do to prepare you for this talk. And this talk was presented by Tony Davis, or Joni Davis, of the American Friends Service Committee, which is an independent Quaker organization. And I have some materials from that presentation. Here is one. I don't know if this is going to come across on the video there, but it's out of focus, so we won't go there. But that's the Quakers, and this is a slide presentation, but it also has audio, so the presenter will be speaking. And this person, Joni Davis, had actually visited Iraq and took a lot of photographs there. Now, a lot of you may be curious why Iraq is so important to us, and there have been many programs about the importance of Iraq. And one of the things you need to be aware of is that, well, this is a show about the faith, about prophecy, and in the book of Revelations, which is an important document of prophecy, the most important document of prophecy in the Bible, which is the most well-read book in the world, and it's the basis of the religions of over 1/3 of the planet. You also have to include Islam. They also have some respect for the Bible, although they believe, a lot of them believe it was tampered. But in any case, in the book of Revelations, it talks about the four winds of destruction are being held back at the great river Euphrates. And the great river Euphrates runs right through Iraq. Now, these four angels are holding back these four winds of destruction, and these four winds of destruction look very much like a nuclear war, earthquakes, comet falling and striking the earth and causing a tidal wave, and the entire crust of the earth shifting, which matches the books and the theories of Charles Hapgood. And the book is currently available on Amazon.com, Path of the Pole, and a few other books of his. And this book, Path of the Pole, has a foreword by Einstein. Apparently, they were in a lot of conversation. So these catastrophes that we're looking at ahead of us seem to be being heralded, being made more imminent by the powers that be. For one reason or another, it's hard to say, but they're certainly making things very, very bad, very terrible for the poor people, the children and the elderly, primarily the children and the elderly. And you'll see a first-hand account of that by these Quakers, by Joni Davis. Now, this is something that seems to be in alignment, coming to a head with the end of the century, the year 2000. And it seems a very interesting coincidence that this year 2000 is also coinciding with the Y2K bug, so Y2K crisis, which is a problem with 2 digits as a date. Now, this is from this past Sunday's Missoulian, and it's November 28th, 1999. And I think it speaks of what some people are doing to get prepared for this potential catastrophe. And I'm just going to read it, at least some of it. So this is a headline: Kalispell man prepares for Y2K fallout. Kalispell. The stories crop up almost daily. Stories of people stockpiling food and gas and water with an eye toward the possible millennial computer crash. Stories of generators selling like hotcakes and hotcake mix generating long lines at the grocery. But finding the anecdotes and stories, it turns out, is far easier than finding people whose pantries are overflowing with grains and beans. That could be because the folks preparing for the worst already are holed up in the hills or beneath the garden in the underground shelter, or it could be because they, by definition, are cautious and wary people, not the sort to advertise their preparedness. Now, I know for myself that I've not always eager to tell people that I'm getting prepared because so many people dismiss this as being a nothing's going to happen. So you have to look at a lot of the lack of people talking about it. It has to do with maybe a certain form of embarrassment almost. But just to continue this article, but most likely it's because they know their neighbors are nowhere near ready for a system-wide collapse, and they fear by announcing their stores of rice and candles, they invite a crush of hard-luck cases to come hat in hand on January 1st. Which is exactly why at least one flathead man, surrounded by buckets of foods and solar devices, doesn't want the world to know where he is. Agreeing to an interview only under the condition that his last name not be used, Mike from Kalispell believes proclaiming his preparedness could likely lead to problems if the grid goes down and desperate looters know where to find him. I'm not the sort of person who will turn anyone away, Mike said, so long as they're polite and in a real need. But I can't afford to feed everyone. Mike has been preparing for about a year, ever since he learned of the Y2K problem while listening to a talk radio show. The host and his callers, he said, were discussing the fact that many older computers are programmed using just the last 2 digits to designate the year 1999, for instance, as is programmed as 99. When the date rolls over to the year 2000, shortened in popular media to Y2K, many computers might be baffled by 00, causing computational glitches or complete shutdowns. That's no problem if it's just a desktop tube computer in your home, but what if systems fail in the computers that control banking, power utilities, heating systems, hospital operations, security systems, the IRS, or any other major sector of private or public society? The answer is a great unknown. Some experts are forecasting gloom and doom, while others are brushing it off as a lot of mountainous hype built from high-tech molehills. The reality is that no one knows. What we do know, however, is that business and governments already have spent millions preparing, and individuals like Mike are preparing as well. Now, I have to give a correction to this piece of this article. According to the Gartner Group, over $500 billion, half a $1 trillion have been spent preparing for the Y2K glitch, and those are reports as of around September. This amount could have gone up. I have a relative. My sister actually has a friend who works in New York City as at generators, and he's being worked overtime a great deal to get prepared in New York City. He works for the police department, and these New York City police are doing their darndest to try and get their generators working so they won't be going down. So to continue, then just to correct, this said millions, but hundreds of billions have been spent. At the end of the radio show, Mike still had but a hazy understanding of the Y2K problem and its implications. But he understood enough, he said, to know he needed to understand more. And so he started tracking down books and articles and videos and seminars on Y2K and survival preparedness. When I finally did begin to understand it, he said, the enormity of the possibilities astounded me, and I realized I wasn't ready. The way I see it, I don't mind buying insurance to be prepared for a car wreck or a broken leg, so why not buy some insurance to be prepared for this thing too? But there were no State Farm agents selling Y2K insurance. Buying that kind of insurance meant buying a bit of extra food, non-perishables, each time he went to the grocery. He justified the extra cost by telling himself that he didn't want to end up in a breadline if something broke down in society. That breakdown, he said, could be Y2K computer glitches, or it could be a crash on Wall Street, or a nuclear detonation, accidental or otherwise. When he looked around his lifestyle for survivalist weak spots, he quickly saw that his home in Spokane was no place to be. If everything hit the fan, he reckoned, a big city would become a dangerous place, what with the panic and the looters and the rush to escape into relative rural safety. And so Mike moved back to western Montana, where he lived years before and where he knew survival would be easier. He couldn't live off the land entirely, he realized, but he would have more control over his necessities if not hooked up to city water and sewer and the power company's gas line. Now, a year later, Mike has a couple of 100 pounds of food in 5-gallon buckets, rice, beans, soups mix, wheat flour, and the like, all kept fresh with oxygen absorber packs. He also has a food dehydrator and dried fruit and vegetables and meat. If it was just me, he said, I'm sure I could live more than a year on the food I have here. But he suspects it won't be just him. A lot of people know where I am, he said, and if the system collapses, I know I'll have some visitors. When the visitors arrive, he said, he can offer them a cup of tea brewed with the water drawn from a well by his new $1,250 solar-powered water pump. He can show them to their rooms in the evening with light from his flashlights beaming from his solar-powered battery chargers. He said he invested in solar technology rather than a generator because if the power goes out, the gasoline will stop flowing, and the generators will be useless when the petrol runs dry. Mike said much of his free time this past summer making sure his own fuel supply was adequate, hauling in about 20 cords of wood for his stove. And just in case the Y2K problem becomes an out-of-control riot of militant panic, he has a new chemical suit and hood, a gas mask, some sewing supplies, various barter items, how-to books, and a handful of tricks up his sleeve to start a fire. Now set up and well-stocked, his attention has turned to educating others. Doing so, he said, is but another piece of self-preservation. Every person who is prepared is one less person who will show up on his doorstep for a handout. He has spent thousands dubbing survival videotapes and mailing them to friends and acquaintances throughout the country. He can show you how to strain mud puddles through a coffee filter and boil the leftover water to remove impurities. He can demonstrate how to build a solar still for distilling potable water from lakes and streams. I don't think that anyone can expect the government or anyone else to take care of them, he said. It's irresponsible not to be prepared. But already, he said, people are tiring of the Y2K warnings, worn out by the overkill in the popular media. Just as people got sick of Monica and El Nino or OJ, he said, they are getting sick of Y2K. The difference is, he said, indifference to Y2K could spell personal tragedy, which is why he is spending so much time and money encouraging others to educate themselves. I don't think things are going to collapse all at once at 12:01 a.m., he said. Instead, he imagines the fall as one of incremental decline, like in a house full of termites. First, you notice a mysterious soft spot in the floor, then a hole appears, then the floor falls in, then the roof tumbles down, then the walls cave in. It might take months. And when the walls of society's systems cave in, he said, he will be ready for the eventual military state that he thinks is sure to follow. And if it doesn't come, he said, I have all this food I can eat for the next year or so. I haven't lost anything getting prepared. Being ready is becoming a lifestyle for me, Y2K or not. If the crisis comes, it might not be Y2K at all. It might be something else, and we don't know how long it might last. I myself don't care how long it lasts. I just want to last as long as I need to. So that's an article from someone in Montana, western Montana, who is getting prepared. And we see plenty of evidence that the World Organization, the World Trade Organization, the governments of the world, that seems to be unifying in some sense in not around anything around justice, but around money and trade and flow of oil. That as this unification is occurring, it's happening in an unjust way, and this injustice is becoming extremely evident, as in the way things have happened in Seattle. Now, this world state that appears to be happening is something that we as Baha'is know that we can scold this government, we can certainly point out and admonish it, we can say when it's doing things wrong, but we also know we have to obey it, because this world power has been given power by the Creator, and this power that it has, given by the Creator, is there for a reason. And we, in this day and age, need to follow that power, although we don't need to do everything it says if what it says is unjust or wrong. In terms of, for example, if it comes to you and tells you to kill someone, well, then you know that you have a higher law you have to obey. But what you do need to do is, if the government comes and tells you to kill someone and then you say, okay, I'm not going to do that, you need to accept the consequences of that government. So this is, for example, the way that Peace was speaking and doing his effective demonstrations in Alaska against the war in Iraq and other demonstrations that he has been participating in as a Baha'i. These demonstrations need to be nonviolent, and they need to, perhaps they will have civil disobedience, but this civil disobedience must not be violent, should not destroy any property, and they need to basically accept being put under arrest. We know that the prophet of this day, the manifestation for this day, Baha'u'llah, went to prison when he was told to go to prison, and so did Dr. Jensen. So this video we're about to see is something that the Baha'is certainly will want other people to know about, and also look at this with an awareness that this war for oil in Iraq is about world domination and world control. And it's an unjust war. It's an unjust, these sanctions are very unjust. But it may very well turn out that this world government's going to get exactly what it wants, and it's going to kill exactly who it wants. But we need to make a stand. And if you want to help these Quakers, they could use your help, because they're doing work over there in Iraq. So without any more ado, let's go to this videotape and see the slide presentation by Joni Davis of the American Friends Service Committee.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. Missoula is happy to welcome Jonas Davis to the University of Montana. My name is Heather Sowers, and I'm from the Missoula Friends meeting. And we're happy to have Jonas with us tonight. The other sponsors of this talk are the Multicultural Alliance here on campus, the Montana Gathering of Friends, which along with Missoula Friends meeting are the Quaker fellowships in Missoula and in Montana. The American Friends Service Committee, which Jonas is a part of, is a Quaker service organization that has been active in international events for many years and won the Nobel Peace Prize in 47. Okay, my memory wasn't that great. But Jonas is here tonight to talk about her summer trip to Iraq and to share with us her experience there and what AFSC is doing for the situation in Iraq and to educate us in this issue. So, welcome.
No, I don't want you to start with Lloyd here.
Okay.
Let me know how it goes. Thank you, Heather and Tom and Missoula Quakers and everybody, and for inviting me and for setting up this evening. I'm really happy to be here. I want to tell you for those of you who don't know anything previously about the American Friends Service Committee, which is the social service arm of the Religious Society of Friends, we have this introductory paper on the table which tells you something about the organization, which was founded in 1917 to provide alternative service for conscientious objectors to the First World War, because the Quakers and the AFSC is a pacifist organization. And that's how it got started, providing relief to victims of the war on both sides and reconstruction afterwards. And those have continued to be some of the main themes of the work. Relief of suffering from war, from natural disasters, reconciliation among people in conflict with an attempt to try to prevent wars and reduce the suffering afterwards. And so a lot of the work started overseas, but then started developing in the United States also during the 30s and 40s. And you could get a hint of that here. The Middle East has been one of the major areas of work for the Service Committee for a long time, and we were among the many people and organizations trying to prevent this blow-up in the Gulf. And when we failed, and in fact there was war, we still worked hard against it, and then to try to relieve suffering. We actually supported the economic sanctions which were put into place to try to induce Saddam Hussein to withdraw from Kuwait. I'll give you a little more background on that in a minute. But at the time the economic sanctions were put in place, they were kind of an embargo to prevent trade with the country and to promote disarmament. We thought it would be a short-term thing, and when the war ended, the first objective was to get Iraq to withdraw from Kuwait. The second objective after the war was for the country to dismantle the weapons of mass destruction that it had built, mostly nuclear. And there was a United Nations team to see that happened. After about 7 years of quite intrusive inspections, in fact, the UN certified that most of the weapons had been dismantled and closed down. However, the sanctions did not come to an end even then, and the objective seems to have changed from disarmament to changing the government. So we've been sort of seeing a changing goalpost there, which makes things particularly difficult. How I happened to go was that the Service Committee a year and a half ago started to become aware, becoming increasingly aware that as these sanctions were maintained year after year after year, preventing the country from importing food and medicine that it needed and rebuilding itself after the war, that the suffering was increasing and increasing. And there were, by a couple of years ago, there were more deaths of children since the end of the war as a result of sanctions than had died during the whole war. And the extent of the human emergency started, it could no longer be ignored. So about a year and a half ago, the board of this organization just decided we needed to put some major focus on it ourselves to help Americans become aware of what was going on there and to see what we could do by way of help. So we sent we sent a delegation of doctors about a year ago to visit hospitals and talk to doctors and the medical schools and so on to assess the medical situation. They were pretty appalled by what they found and wrote this report, Child and Maternal Health, Nutrition, and Welfare in Iraq Under the Sanctions. You have a couple of copies over there. I see that most of them are gone. So if you want to read some pretty grisly statistics and reports and would like to have a copy of this, please, in any case, sign up, but next to your name, if you haven't been able to get a copy, put that you'd like to have it. Just a sanctions report, health report. The second delegation that we sent was a group of teachers to do a similar check of the education system. Their report's about to be published. And then the third one went in June. I was very happy to be invited to be on that one. It was committee and staff members for the American Friends Service Committee, and our assignment was to absorb what the previous delegations had learned, to observe for ourselves and to make recommendations about particular things that the American Friends Service Committee could do to help in a practical way in Iraq, and also to help Americans, especially because our government's role is very instrumental there, become aware of the needs and the issues and sort of speak to our members of Congress and government to try to get a change in the policy. So that's how I happened to be there. We went in June. There were 6 of us from the United States, as I mentioned, of whom 4 were fluent in Arabic, which was a big boost because then we were able to speak firsthand with people that we saw. I want to also give you a little bit of a historical and geographical briefing, because I have to say that sure, that's great. I'm sorry. When all this started impinging on my consciousness, I had the sense Iraq. I mean, I know it's in the Middle East somewhere, but I didn't really know very much about it. And then other people also say, well, what does that have to do with us? But anybody who has grown up in the U.S. has the Bible somewhere in their background, and you may or may not know where the Garden of Eden is supposed to be. It's here in the traditional location of the Garden of Eden is here in Iraq. The place to which Jonah was directed by God to go and preach to the people was Nineveh, which is here in Iraq. The place where Abraham was born, the patriarch, was Ur of the Chaldees, which is here in Iraq. So there's kind of a historical connection between all this area and us, and it goes with this civilization there, goes back to pre-biblical times, I mean 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years. Pretty important. Tell you something about the neighborhood. So here, this is Iraq. In ancient times it was called Babylonia. After that it was called Mesopotamia, meaning the land between the 2 rivers. The 2 rivers are the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. They start up here in Turkey in the hills. They flow down through Iraq and meet and flow out into the Arabian Gulf, which is why the Garden of Eden was in this well-watered, fertile crescent. That was the area. So the neighbors are Turkey to the north, Iran to the east. Iran has a large population, about 80 million people. Traditional enemies of the Babylonians, the Mesopotamians, the Turks. I don't mean the Turks, I mean the Iraqis. Iraq has a population of roughly 22 million. To the west, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait here. And as I said, that's the Arabian Gulf. As in one of the aftermath sanction items of Iraq is a no-fly zone. There's Iraqi planes are prohibited from flying in the southern part of the country where the Shiites live, and in the northern part of the country where the Kurds live. And that's conceived of or described as a way of protecting the population. Because of the no-fly zone, also the main airport in Baghdad is closed, so you can't fly there. Therefore, we and many visitors fly to Amman, Jordan here, and then drive across the desert to Baghdad. So it's several hundred miles, maybe 300, 400, maybe 500. It took us about 9 hours driving very, very fast across straight roads at 100 miles an hour in June. I mean, it really was 130 kilometers an hour, but you barely feel it because the roads are very straight and fairly empty, except for the occasional oil truck flowing into Jordan, because that's the only legal place to trade. Another important feature of the geography of Iraq is that it has oil. It was discovered in the 1920s, and it has about 10% of the world's reserve of oil. That makes it, by definition, important in the world economy. A quick historical briefing. So the ancient times, start with the Assyrians. We can close this one. It was under the control of the Ottoman Empire until the end of the First World War, when it became a British mandate. It was in the 20s that oil was discovered, and it was developed by Britain. So Britain developed the whole industry. A lot of the oil was sent by pipeline over to Haifa for refining. Britain made the profits on the oil, not the Iraqi people. Nonetheless, many Iraqis also prospered. In 1932, it achieved political independence from Britain, the first Arab country to become independent. But it was still under the economic control of Britain until the late 1950s. There was a series of revolutions. When the Ba'ath Party came into power in the 60s, was the beginning of kind of major changes. Saddam Hussein was part of the Ba'ath Party. He sort of clawed his way to the head of it and became the president at the end of the 1960s. And in 1972, Iraq nationalized the oil industry, a pretty major accomplishment, and made a very big change in government there. Just a quick thing about the Ba'ath Party. It's a party that has social welfare as one of its emphases, and in fact, during the 1970s, using the huge income from the sale of oil, the government did massive social spending, set up an excellent educational system to which everybody was entitled, free education, free and required through the age of 13 and available and free through university. So it's a very good system, an excellent health system, and everybody who worked for the government, which was a large majority of people, also got free housing. So they were really well being provided for by the government, which, however, also spent a great deal on arming itself. So on the one hand, it was socially minded, and incidentally, another feature of the social welfare was equality of women. Women had equal access to men, to education at every stage, to governmental roles and so on. And today, you'll see some women in the pictures here, even today, and that's distinctive in the Arab world. Another feature, though, of the party is that it's quite totalitarian. It's built on a system of internal spying to sort of build control, top-down control. So it's a pretty fascistic kind of government. So you have this kind of mix of different, it's not as simple as it's portrayed. And even today, the government, in a lot of ways, treats people quite equitably, as long as they don't criticize it, because criticism of the government is a capital offense. So that also applied to us when we went, that we were advised not to speak critically about the government or anything really, because it was we should assume that we were always there might always be somebody to listen to us. So I think that's enough by way of introduction. I'll show you some slides and speak while the slides are going. But if you have questions at any point, please ask them. You don't have to wait till the end. A map of the country that was on the wall of the Ministry of Agriculture. Can you all hear all right? Okay. It's a topographic map. So the brown parts are the highest altitude, going downhill till the green, which is also the area of the river valleys. And in good times, in ancient times when it was the Fertile Crescent, and good times even more recently, the area had a lot of water. So potentially good for agriculture, although because they had so much oil income, they did less with agriculture than they might have. The section that looks very blue at the bottom, the blue at that point represents marshland, and there was extensive marshland in the southern part of the country where people lived in the marshes and built their houses and other communal structures out of tall reeds that grew there, and used dugout canoes to fish. They hunted for very plentiful fowl and had a pretty good life, pretty independent of the government. But because they're also close to the border with Iran, it was considered too good a hiding place. So the government basically moved everybody out of there and drained the marshes, a kind of a major ecosystem tragedy. And you'll see some more about that, but I wanted to mention it while you could look at this on the map. Now, I'd like to start with these pictures from ancient times, just to sort of remind us of the historical grounding of this country. We saw this in the Iraq Museum, which is closed, but a few of us got permission to go and see what was left, and it was closed because most of the items that were movable had been moved out so they wouldn't be subject to being bombed during the Gulf War. This is part of a huge wall of ceramic painted brick. I mean, think of this is 5,000 years old. Entering Baghdad. Baghdad is built on the Tigris River. There's about a dozen bridges or more across it. They were all blown up during the war and immediately rebuilt. You can sort of barely make out that there's wide boulevards on either side of it. Baghdad is actually quite a nice city. It's low-rise and wide boulevards, lots of monuments, and some nice buildings, some ugly ones too. This is the head of the country. This is a small poster. Mostly the posters of Saddam Hussein are gigantic and outside, but we were advised against taking pictures of him. But one thing that's interesting is that his costume changed depending on the site of the picture. So outside the court building, he was dressed in judicial robes. Outside the mosque, he was in Islamic garb. Outside the military headquarters, he was in military uniform. And in this hotel, he's dressed like a tourist. So like us, with his pear shape. You'll see that again, because that's the sort of shape to indicate if you're a prosperous Iraqi male, that's what you want to look like. And I sort of decided that probably that this multifaceted personality was just, he was always wanting to show whatever you are, I am too. So it's like every man. And this is the rendition of our head of state at the time of the Gulf War. Can you all see that little label at the bottom? Bush is criminal. It is a portrait in a mosaic of George Bush with kind of demonic canines. And this is at the entrance to the five-star hotel in Baghdad, where I didn't stay, by the way. But this is where all the diplomats and the journalists and CNN stayed during the war. And so lots and lots of international people walk over this, and which you have to do to enter the building. There's monuments. This is a monument to the unknown soldier, huge. The thing looking like a rocket or something at the left is actually a modernistic version of a ziggurat, which was the architectural form that the Tower of Babel also was. In the middle, that big round thing is a representation of the Earth. The wholeness, it's not a satellite dish. There's also a lot of monuments around from the Arabian Nights, which were also set in Baghdad and in Basra. So this is a Sinbad, but there's also a big one of, and very seductive one of Scheherazade telling tales to the Sultan, and Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. We were hosted by an organization called the Middle East Council of Churches, which is a branch of the World Council of Churches. And that organization works in Iraq under the sponsorship of the Iraqi Red Crescent Society, which differs from the Red Cross in that this is really a branch of the government, very close to the government. So everything is pretty controlled. The Iraqi Red Crescent monitors pretty carefully who's there, and there aren't very many international organizations, maybe about 5 or 6. So when a small one like ours is interested in being involved there, we have to be hosted by one or the other. And so the Middle East Council of Churches was our sponsor. We had official visits. This woman was the Minister of Information. She has in front of her news supplement that I was able to bring from Seattle that was published by the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. So quite a good piece. There were two, a photojournalist and a reporter from the Seattle paper went along with the delegation and produced this. And so it was very good for her. She was very glad to have it because to see how they were being represented in the outside world. And then in the front, you see that report I just showed you from the FSC. The basic message that she gave us, and that we heard then from many other people, but hers officially representing the Iraq government, was, we are suffering greatly under the impact of the sanctions. There's huge numbers of deaths of children and old people from malnutrition, from the diseases that come from malnutrition, the diseases that come from polluted water because we haven't been able to rebuild our water treatment plants or our electrical system. These are all things that we could take care of ourselves if we were allowed to do it. We want to do it ourselves. We don't want to be recipients of international aid. Before the Gulf War, we were donors in the world, and we don't like to be on the other side of it. So the message that they were eager for us to take back to the U.S. was that this is all preventable, the kind of suffering that you'll see. This was on the wall outside her office. I don't know if you can see that in the back. I'll read it. It's a quotation from an interview in 1996 from the television show 60 Minutes. It's an interview with Madeleine Albright, who was at that time U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. And the question asked by Leslie Stahl, the reporter, "We have heard that 500,000 children have died as a result of sanctions against Iraq. I mean, that is more children than died in Hiroshima. And, you know, is the price worth it?" And Madeleine Albright's reply, "I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it." And she has, now as Secretary of State, reiterated basically that position recently. It's still the U.S. policy. This man was the Deputy Minister of Agriculture where that map was taken. The book that he's holding, which we were able to give him, was a book of abstracts of scientific literature in the field of agriculture during the preceding year. And we were able to bring this kind of a book with abstracts from many scientific fields, including medicine, all the different medical specialties. One of the reasons why it was an important thing to be able to bring was because among the items prohibited under the embargo is scientific literature. So they're not able to get current scientific research in their fields. It's prohibited, at least not by the males. So, but people who are able to get in can bring them. So he was very glad to have it. This man, by the way, has his PhD in agriculture from the University of Nebraska. And a lot of the higher level government people have been educated, at least in part, overseas. We also met with a couple of the other NGOs. This was the man from the International Committee for the Red Cross, not very closely related to the American Red Cross, by the way, although they're part of the same big organization. These two women were from CARE International, both English women married to Iraqis, and they basically all told us the same thing that we also heard from the people at the United Nations, where I wasn't able to take pictures, which is this, that the suffering as a result of the sanctions was so severe that even though the weapons dismantlement was going on, the international community was getting very upset at the amount of suffering. Therefore, about 3 years ago, the UN instituted what was called the Oil for Food program, which allowed Iraq to sell a certain amount of oil, $5.2 billion worth of oil each 6-month period. The proceeds from these sales would be closely monitored by the UN, and it would be used only for the purchase of food, medicine, and certain kind of spare parts that couldn't conceivably be used for weapons manufacture. And that was all under very close supervision, so that the Iraqi government basically had nothing to do with it, never saw the money or anything. So the Oil for Food program was set up, and it somewhat has relieved a level of the malnutrition, but the question of how much oil should be sold was a function of how much repair do you want to do. And what they did was they allowed enough money to come in to buy food to maintain the level of malnutrition at 23%. In other words, it wasn't to solve the problem, it was to sort of contain the problem. That was the figure that was given to us at the United Nations, 23%. So the NGO people all told us as well that this is a disaster. I wanted to also give you a sense of the reality of Baghdad. This is a view from the place where we stayed, a small apartment hotel. Very, very pleasant. That's where the Middle East Council of Churches also had its office. There was a pool there that was used by people in the area. The food was wonderful in the restaurants if you could afford to buy it. We as foreigners, we were able to. Iraqis usually are not able to because they're broke. There's been such hyperinflation that the salaries, which 10 years before the war were worth about $300, which was not bad considering that education, health care, and housing were paid for. But the same salary is now worth only about $3. So how does a family meet its expenses? It's devastatingly difficult. So this meal, which was wonderful, would have been quite a luxury for most Iraqi families. However, some people are doing fine. People who are involved in smuggling, people who have friends in high places or are able to benefit from the contracting that's going on. So not everybody is starving, just a lot of people. Like the man at the right is not starving. That's the as I said, the shape that a man has to show that he's prospering. And he's even wearing blue jeans, which was unusual. 3 generations of a family of women window shopping, which is probably the best they can do right now. The woman at the left is the grandmother in pretty traditional dress, and the mother in the middle in a dress, and then the 2 daughters in pants. It's a secular society and around Baghdad, so people are not covered up by and large, except elderly and more traditional types of people. One of the ways that a family can get extra money is by selling its good things. It's candlesticks, it's rugs, it's chandeliers, it's silverware, and so on. And this is an auction. These auctions are held several times a week, and people who have the money come and buy family treasures from the people who have had to sell them. There's also a lot of dealers from Beirut, from Amman, sort of stocking up while we can. The man behind the desk with his hand up, we were interviewing people because we wanted to know how do you manage to survive and take care of a family on $3 a month? So the man at the desk, sitting at the desk, is a water engineer. So he has a salary from this private contractor, but it's not enough. Because he lives on the edge of town, he is able to have a cow and some chickens and a garden to raise some food. But one of the principal sources of supplementary income is he's set up a little sewing business in his home. His wife and his daughters and his sister-in-law and her daughters, they bought a sewing machine, so they just have a home clothing manufacturing, which is a pretty good solution for them. And everybody's got to have something. This woman was telling, a Kurdish woman, well-educated, working in the office, told us how she managed. I want to go back, though. Oops, wrong way. The guy with the telephone is the head of that office. He's a contractor who gets a lot of stuff done. But he's from a very well-connected family, has a brother who's highly placed in the government. He himself is prospering. After he heard our interviews with the other people, he said, well, don't you want to interview me too? And so he told us how his family manages, which is basically fine, although they've had to curtail their entertaining, because people don't want to go out so much at night because people will break into their homes. So that was a kind of a social issue that he talked about. Another thing is, notice in the back there's a computer, and it was the first computer that we'd seen. It even had Windows 95 on it. So we had a little chit-chat about computers. And then I asked him something I already knew the answer to, but I was curious to see what he would say about it. And I asked him if he had the internet. And he gave me a hard look, and he said, no, we don't have the internet. And then I asked, why not? And he made this gesture of the finger across the throat as if, he said, do you want me to have my head cut off? I can't talk to you about that. But that's the nearest we got to have anybody inside sort of make a political comment. But it's basically, the sanctions keep things out, but also the government keeps information out. They're not interested in the free flow of information, which you would get with the internet. Not even the UN has access to the internet there. Now we're in the southern part of the country where the suffering is the most severe. It's a predominantly Shiite population. The Shiites had an uprising against the central government just at the end of the war and were brutally repressed. Food is distributed equally to everybody in the country, so all of them also get rations, but they have fewer other resources to buy additional food. So this is one of the areas where there's the most malnutrition. The UN does a survey of children and with measuring height and weight and diameter of the wrists of children and so on to find out who's malnourished, and then the children who are certified to be malnourished are eligible for some additional food. And that's what these women are in line to get, is an extra supplement of dried milk for their children. There's some of the women in the line. The Red Crescent man down here in the south. Everywhere we went, and into each province we had to have a special visa, and we were always hosted by the Red Crescent. The people who had been displaced from the marshlands are called internally displaced persons there. They're like internal refugees, and mostly they were plunked down to do the best they could. I'm going to sort of shoot forward a bit. They settled in some half-built government housing like that across the way, with the windows all bricked up because there's no glass and it does get pretty cold in the wintertime. The one that we're just at here has been finished and fixed up under a contract with the Middle East Council of Churches, so it's sort of a private venture. And, you know, considering that it's basically a refugee camp, at least it's clean and bright. There's glass in the windows here, but a whole family will live in one room, and the families tend to be about 10 or 11 or 12 people. There's the bedding stacked up on the cupboard in the background. They eat and, you know, sort of do a lot of activities right there in the room. There is a communal kitchen in the bathroom. But realize that that's good accommodations for some of these folks. This woman, surrounded by members of her family, appeals to me because she's very clearly very strong, very dignified. She's not anybody's victim. But when you look at the faces of the children, you see that they're the ones who have been suffering most. I mean, she and the other adults grew up prior to sanctions, but these kids have never had an adequate diet. And when you talk to them, which many of the members of our group were able to do, and say, hi, what's your name, and how old are you, and so on, and you think that they're going to tell you that they're 5 years old or 6 or 7, but they really tell you that they're 9, 10, or 11, or 12, so then you see that they've really experienced stunting. And there's others, some of the other results of malnutrition are vulnerability to diseases and mental retardation, a variety of things. This is a street in Bosworth that had been bombed by the United States. You may know that we're still sending planes to enforce the no-fly zone. We have planes fly over there, our planes, every day, and they do bombing every so often, theoretically, supposedly at gun emplacements and things, but this was just a neighborhood of homes that had been blown up. It's under construction. What we're doing, we're visiting projects of a reconstruction project. Some kids on that street. I have to say that you hold up try to take pictures and children are there. And if you're taking pictures of little girls, little boys are there. So that's why there's little boys in the front, even though the little girls were the subject of the picture. This is in a hospital, and this, unfortunately, I'm only going to show you 2 hospital pictures, but the hospitals are really, really in bad shape. They're doing the best they can, but they are not able to get the spare parts to repair things, and so things are pretty battered, and they have some medicine, but not as much as they need. We've been able to deliver several shipments of medicine directly to people who, exactly what they ask for, so that's of some help, but it's really just a drop in the bucket. That little boy, by the way, is suffering from childhood leukemia, and there's quite a lot of childhood leukemia, a much higher level than they used to be before. And there's a lot of birth deformities as well has children who have all kinds of system-wide infections, to which they're particularly vulnerable because of untreated, polluted water. But if you have if your child is going and you want it to have there to be bedding, you have to bring it yourself. And on the other hand, life goes on as well. This is a spice shop in Basra. The market, those are the black robes are called abayas, and that's what the women wear. It's the sort of traditional cover-up robe to indicate piety. So it's a lady wearing it, walking along, and they're hanging from hangers, and that's where people can buy them. But again, hold up a camera, and there's always some smiling people right in front. An area of Basra that I think has been subject to bombing. Oops, lost one there. Basra was the main port from, well, first Babylonia, then Mesopotamia, now Iraq, to the Orient. So it was the place for the trading of spices and coffee and tea. It was the route to India. It was a major, major trading center. And I'm going to go back in history for a while. Anyone who has read much in the Old Testament knows that after the Second Temple in Jerusalem was destroyed and the Jews were carted off to Babylonia by King Nebuchadnezzar and lived in the area called Babylonia. That's where it was during this period called the Babylonian exile that the Talmud was written, for example, a major Jewish text commenting on the Bible. And there's been sort of a continuous Jewish population in Iraq from that time, from biblical times, to virtually the present, until about 1947, 48, 49, 50, after the creation of the State of Israel, which was vigorously opposed by Iraq. The Jewish population mostly left during that 48 to 50 period. And most of those who stayed there left after 1967. So that now there's just a tiny number of Jews in Baghdad, and I'm not sure if there's even any in Basra. But this whole area that we're looking at now, this old part, was the Jewish quarter of the time, and these were the homes of prosperous merchants. They're now pretty much deserted or used as squatters. This one had been restored, was under restoration before the Gulf War. The idea was, and even the one that just 2 slides ago with the sign on said Basra Museum. I mean, the plans were to open it as a museum and should be a tourist attraction, but it's another one of those memories that you sort of want to learn more about the stories behind this. This is in the town of Nasiriyah up the Euphrates, north of Basra, a bombed bridge.